No, actually, I'll do it. It's not my research. Hi. For people who don't know me, it's all right. It's a long morning, so I'm not going to talk about variable fonts. I apologize. In fact, I'm going to talk about fonts that you cannot change their sizes. If you have 8-point, 10-point, 12-point, 14-point type, just deal with it. I'm currently the executive director of the HoffmanSmokin Center for Typography at ArtCenter College of Design. They asked me to talk about how analog technology or letterpress or the archetypes of pre-digital fonts are currently woven into contemporary design education. And we have a mantra at ArtCenter College of Design that typography is the spine that runs through the body of graphic design. Thank you, Simon Johnston. He's my colleague and creative director of the HMCT. But in order to do this, you need a lot of support. You need a lot of space. You need a lot of support monetarily and spatially and for curriculum. This is our facility over here. This is the HMCT is part of ArtCenter College of Design. It is a separate center, though. It's not under the graphic design department, but it works closely with graphic design and the other departments at the center. What's wonderful about the HoffmanSmokin Center for Typography is we have a great deal of autonomy, and we're the new babies on the block. We haven't even been open 2 years. A little bit of history, it was started by a wonderful donation by the husband of a former faculty member and letterform designer, Leah Hoffmitz. And when she became ill, and this is a little bit sad story, she became ill, and when she was ill, though, we had been colleagues for about over 20 years. I said to her husband, you know, she really deserves her name on a building, so be careful what you ask for. Because her husband then decided, well, this is a great tribute to her, and he started the HoffmanSmokin Center for Typography, which is in this building. We have a South Campus now. So the center now encompasses everything from analog technology through data visualization, augmented reality, typography. We're not about just analog, we're about the thread of typography. And also because we're a freestanding center, we can partner with any other typographic group or educational institution worldwide. And I really hope that people do look at the center as a place to approach and say, look, we've got great ideas. Let's work together and let's partner together. So when we talk about generosity of space, the center itself is comprised of about 8,500 square feet now. We've just expanded to overtake or take under our wings Archetype Press, which is ArtCenter's letterpress facility, and which I had been director of since 2004. That is my typographic background. Well, not exactly. I started out in branding and packaging, and here I am now. In 1991, I set my first few lines of type, metal type, and I fell in love with it. So I have been a letterpress printer and typographer using metal type ever since. It almost didn't survive. Archetype Press almost did not survive. In 2004, when I first became the director, like every other institution, ArtCenter was going to get rid of its letterpress facility. We have over 2,500 cases of type, 10 Vandercook-proof presses, and it sits in a 4,000 square foot space. So the center, the college decided that when the original director retired, let's just get rid of it. Thank you, my LA taggers and graffiti artists. Well, they went ballistic and said, save the press, we can't get rid of the press, you can't let the budget committee decide our education. So they went and they spammed the entire college, including the president's office, with posters. And when he walked out of his office and said, what the F is Archetype Press? We can't have this happen. And ever since then, the college has been extremely supportive of the press and its value within the education of our students. So when we talk about typography being the spine of graphic design, we're the opposite. We're not a type design program at ArtCenter, we're a graphic design program. but type is really woven into our program. This gives you just the skeleton of the required classes, type 1, type 2, 3, 4, 5, and then some of the augmented classes, exhibit design, advanced lettering design, digital font design. Our students start with your basic letterform design, and then they go all the way through what we call transmedia design or transmedia typography, where they're creating their own software, they're creating their own devices to project, to have experiential type. And as you notice, Letterpress somehow weaves its way into it. So our first experience with Letterpress, I call the type 1, type 2 structure form. This is an example of, this is actually a picture of our students working. And type 1, type 2 is when they're really learning about the structure of type. And what's so good about them addressing type in the press is that they're reminded about the physicalness of type, that type is architecturally beautiful, that it's modular, that it has a history, so that as they're learning their letter forms, they're also learning about the construct of types. And this is, we have a mantra in the press, which is type first. We are not a book arts program. We are a typography program. And I'm proud to say, if something happens to render itself in a book, well, that's okay. We have about 600 different typefaces. That's just the metal. I'm not even counting the wood type. The original collection came from Vernon Simpson, who is a wonderful Los Angeles typographer and typesetter. And he actually, if you ask April Greiman, who taught her how to set type and all about type, yes, she did go to Basel, but she said Vernon Simpson told her how to be a good typesetter. What I do love about typography, or the students taking letterpress in their first 2 terms, is they're also reminded that type is a business and type has a history, and that there are people associated with the names of the types that they're working with. And I think that's extremely important, because we forget today, digitally, that there is a face behind that type. And maybe one day, you'll be studied, all the type designers out here, as Bodoni was studied and Baskerville was studied, and people will associate you with the typeface or the name that they see digitally. And I think it's very important to remember that it's a business and that there are people who make their living designing type. So some of our first projects, of course, we have them do type specimen sheets. They also have the opportunity to go into the foundry, and I encourage them to work with type that they can't find digitally. So this is an example of information, and it's all hand set and hand printed. Of course, I'm just going to show you the pretty stuff. I'm not going to show you the black and white proofs and when things didn't work right. This is the finished project. And if you look at 5 colors, I mean, the students slow down to do this. And that's the other important aspect about weaving letterpress into a typographic education. You've got to slow down and look at the details. Sometimes today, I think students are so, they make the assumption that the computer looks at the details for them. And I think type design is so sophisticated today that I tell them, yes, your type designer, your digital type designer has done a lot of work for you, but he hasn't done, or she hasn't done everything for you. So by setting by hand, they come to realize that the details are in what they decide. And I also hope that after they spend hours and hours and days setting type, that they kiss their computer and they realize that it's their best friend, that they don't have to do this again. But it gives you an idea, too, of the foundry we have. We have, wonderful Stevenson Blake grotesque number 9. We also ask the students, just don't set the type like you can on the computer. Use the technology, it's an older technology, and have a little bit fun with it. Enjoy it, enjoy the textural quality of it. We also, of course, have a great collection of American types, because this is an American foundry. So you'll find a lot of reverse stress types. You'll find, a great sense of humor. You'll find a lot of revivalist typefaces. So the students are really exposed here, and this is very beginning of their type learning, to what they won't see on the computer. Okay, so when we turned 21 years old, I decided we have to do a bar book. It was 21, so we can drink. So each student in this particular project had to do an interpretation of a drink, and again, try to use the personality, their choices of the type that they have in the press to show the personality of a drink. And yes, there were more than 21 of these, and I only have a few of them. Some of you might recognize some of the types we have, you know, the Othello, here you see in the Molotov cocktail. Yes, it was a cocktail. That's not Futura. Those of you who know the American type foundry, it was Spartan. They didn't want to pay Bauer for the matrices, so let's just copy it. That doesn't go on today, does it? Then we move into, as the students are moving along in their second and third years, or the second year, third year, they're learning about content and voice, editorial, and print and digital. With this, they're also doing interface design. They're also doing identity systems. They're also doing, you know, information design. So what happens now that they're, after a year or more, they're really involved in the digital environment of learning typography digitally, well, then they need to get off the computer. Here, the students really want to learn about the voice of type. What can they do to create a better voice, to have fun with type again? Because digitally, they feel that sometimes they're too restricted by the screen and that they want to get off the computer or to complement it a little bit. So here, the students are dealing with the voices of type. The voice that they can have a louder voice, perhaps, hand-setting wood type than they can on a digital screen. So all of these were, of course, all of this is handset. All the type done at the press must be analog. They are not allowed to use photopolymer plates. They can cut type if they want in a CNC machine, but they are not allowed to use any digital production in their types. This is kind of interesting when you look at this. I wanted to show you, again, how important voice is to the student. And they can sometimes only express a certain voice in an analog, or better express it in an analog environment rather than in a digital environment. And the one on the right, where it says imperialism and immigration, this is handset. This is handset. And yes, it's put around a figure. And the students were really surprised. The students said to me, I don't understand, it's perfect. How can it be so perfect? And I said, because the type was designed on a body that doesn't allow you to screw it up digitally. So he was very surprised that he was able to achieve this in an analog environment, where he said he tried it in the digital environment and found it extremely difficult to achieve the same perfection with the same type. The other projects that the students find at this stage in their education is really the complexities of working with writers and voice. So here again, they use the foundry and they use the type to really express perhaps the voice of another, the voice of a dead writer, or the voice of a poet who's still alive. We have a wonderful program for the last 5 years where we work with an LA poet, and teams of students, 2 students, team up together and they create these wonderful chapbooks that they do an interpretation of the work of the poet. And some poets are really flexible and you know, you can do anything you want with their work, and other poets are, you know, you can't change my line break. These students were very lucky. They created this imagery, believe it or not. They went to the hardware store and they bought hardware. If we can make it type high, I told them, we can print them. And they took it to heart. They actually said, okay, I can make this type high. And I said, please just don't ruin the press. Then we move into type 5. And at this point, the students are writing their own code, writing their own programming, creating their own machines to have the digital types do what they want to do, especially in data visualization. So they're back. They're back into the press because sometimes their work in transmedia, they have to do an analog piece, and not necessarily a letterpress piece, but they're back to really looking again at the forms of the letters or the type that they want to work with. They're also doing advanced lettering and digital font design. So I'm just going to show you one project. We've had a lot of students go through the program at ArtCenter who have then gone on to become wonderful type designers. You might know Josh Finkla and, of course, Mike Abink. And both of them went through this program and experienced how much more they can improve their ability as a type designer by embracing the analog when it's appropriate. So here's an example of a master student who decided that he did not see a good digital version of Venus. So obviously, we do have Venus at the press, and he started with just hand setting using the Venus type that we have. What can he do? What can he design with using the type? It also reminds the student who takes digital font design that designing your typeface is modular. Because again, in the press, everything is still modular. You cannot change things. I work closely with Greg Lindy, who does the digital font design, and he encourages the students to remember that you can go back to look at original archetypes, but remember when you do your designs that it must be in your current voice. I am definitely a fan of designing for your technologies. I don't believe you should go back and just redraw a face exactly as it was. You have to put your own personality and your own technologies into what you're designing today. But he does start in analog. He does research. Part of what the center has is we've started an archive of typography, and one of the areas that we do collect are only specimens that we have in our letterpress studio. But he looks. He did a lot of work online and a lot of work in the archives looking at original specimens for Venus. Then, of course, he goes through the traditional steps of creating his own version of what he could consider a Venus-based typeface. Again, setting up his modular alphabet, and then this is his final. And I have to admit, I had no idea it was all going to be about ice hockey. Even coming here to Montreal, I didn't know that his face, all of these names, if you live in Montreal, these are all hockey players. So he named it Goon. So it gives you an idea of this is a student who might have started in the press hand setting at the beginning of his education, and then at the end, he comes back again. Even though he is designing in a contemporary digital technology, he still sees the advantage of going back to looking at older technologies to help him design his current digital technologies. Now, I did promise you something. When my talk says that our Sabon is not your Sabon, it really isn't. I'm going to let you wonderful type designers and historians look at this. It's the Stempel Sabon Roman and italic and 48 point. The Roman is not quite as perfectly kerned in the foundry. The italic is kerned in the foundry. And I just find it very interesting, the choices that were made in terms of a few of the characters and a few of the glyphs. I don't know if anyone has ever seen this before, because it does not exist. When it was recut, quite a bit of the characters were changed, but these two were the most noticeable, these two glyphs that were extremely different from what we see digitally. I want to thank you, and I want to thank Greg and my students for allowing me to use their work. So thank you.